got you. It's nice to have so many visitors with us. If any of you have not picked up the communion emblems on the way in and need someone to bring them to you, please just raise your hand, and we'll get those passed to you. Got one over here. Anyone else? All right, so Ryan's going to bring some around. Thank you. So as we prepare to partake of the Lord's Supper, I want to just have some thoughts, some discussion about where is God? And when we think about the Lord's Supper, we think about one major event. We think about, you can call it more than that, but the resurrection of Jesus. He raised on the first day of the week. So on the first day of the week, every week, we think about that. But I want to look at some question or some challenges we might have. Sometimes when things are difficult, we ask, where is God? And that's not a question that's unique in any sense. That's a question that Jesus asked when he was on the cross at the end of his life. If you remember, he uttered the phrase, my God, why have you forsaken me? So, God, where are you? In this pain, where are you? You may be aware that he's quoting from a psalm, and I'm going to read some of that psalm. I think it's a powerful psalm, and we won't read all of it, but I want to read a little bit from the start of it. It says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our fathers trusted. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried and were rescued. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. But I am a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind and despised by the people. All who see me mock. They make mouths at me. They wag their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, for he delights in him. And for now, that's all we'll read on this. But I think we can see so many things from this psalm. First, we see the pain of feeling all alone, feeling like you have no help. And it's interesting because we see this individual, David, who wrote this, or Jesus, as he uttered this, was well aware of God's power. Like, there was no question, I don't think, from either of those, that God had the power to save them, to protect them, to comfort them. And one of the things that's pointed out that I think is ironic here, in this passage, we see him say, we've seen you deliver our forefathers. We know your history of saving others. And if you think about it, as Jesus is on the cross, is that not exactly what was hurled at him? You saved others, save yourself. And yet, Jesus knew that wasn't what was needed at that time. But I think in some ways we probably have all been in situations where we thought, where are you, God? Because we know we need help. And hopefully we recognize that, yes, God, we know you can deliver us, but where are you? And I want to look through the Old Testament. We're going to look through these pretty quickly. I think all of these we could spend a lot of time on. But I want to look at several examples of where God showed up to people. So if you think about who was someone who wondered where God was, where are you, God? We can probably think of several of those. Maybe the most famous or the most well-known or well thought of in that would be Job. If you think about with Job, I'll read a couple verses here from Job. First in chapter 7, I want to just point out kind of what he's feeling. In verses 19 and 20, he says, how long will you not look away from me, nor leave me alone till I swallow my spit? If I sin, what do I do to you, you watcher of mankind? Why have you made me your mark? Why have I become a burden to you? So not only is Job wondering, God, why aren't you fixing this? Why aren't you helping me? He's recognized, God, why are you causing these things to happen to me? Why are you looking on me with scorn, letting these terrible things happen, this pain that he's feeling? And, sometimes when God answers big. All right? So if you look, and we won't read all of his statement, but just in chapter 38, verse 1, it says, after all these complaints, then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. All right? Picture like a tornado coming through, and God is answering out of a tornado. All right? That's going to get your attention, right? There's no mistaking this. There's no missing it. Sometimes God is going to come in a big way. We've seen that throughout the Bible. We see his history of showing up in a big way for his people. But again, we're going to go through some of these quickly. So I want to look at another instance of someone who felt all alone, who felt abandoned, who felt like death was the only option, like seems like Job felt, and see how God answers here. If you want to follow along, 1 Kings chapter 19. Elijah has seen God's big power. Elijah has seen God answer in a big way. If you remember just a couple chapters ago, not very long in the timeline before this, Elijah has basically called down fire from God. God has sent down fire to consume the sacrifice and then to consume the false prophets of Baal. So God answered answered Elijah in a big way there. But Elijah is still being pursued. He's still being harassed. He still feels the trouble. And so in verse 9 of 1 Kings 19, says, Then there he came to a cave and lodged in it, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, What are you doing here, Elijah? He said, I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I, even I alone, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. And he said, Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him. And so we won't read all this, but the voice sends him the comforting message. Hey, I gotcha. You're protected. And not only that, you're not all alone. There are these 7,000 others who are right with you. All right, so we see God can answer in those big ways. God can show up in the wind or in the earthquake or in the fire. We've seen examples of that throughout the Bible. But here, I guess that's not what Elijah needed. Elijah didn't need to see the power of God. He just needed that comforting whisper. He just needed that comforting, that peace that only God could bring. Sometimes, God speaks and is heard. But turn over to 2 Kings. Let's look in 2 Kings chapter 6. And we'll see what I think is a very fascinating story here, where God is invisible. God doesn't speak, at least in the usual sense. But here Elisha, the armies are coming to surround him, and they want him taken away. And so his servant is quite worried. He feels outnumbered by this army that has encompassed them. And so in verse 15 of 2 Kings chapter 6, he says, When the servant of the man of God rose early in the morning and went out, behold, an army with horses and chariots was all around the city. And the servant said, Alas, my master, what shall we do? We're surrounded here. We're in trouble. There's nothing we can do. But he said, Do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Then Elisha prayed and said, O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see. So the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. Can you imagine that picture? Like you feel surrounded, and yet God opens your eyes and shows that surrounding this army that's surrounding you is this massive army of horses and chariots and fire. And again, God is there even when we don't have our eyes open to see him. And I think that's one of the things we can get here. Maybe God is not going to speak to us in a whirlwind or even speak to us in a whisper, but this picture shows us that even when we don't see it, God is there. God is around us. And so I think that's such a comfort. I want to look at a couple other examples, and we'll just briefly mention these. But of someone who called to God and God sent a helper or sent an answer from someone else. So think about Hannah. Hannah's distressed. She can't have a child. She's being scorned by her husband's other wife with all the kids, and she's just, God, please help me. Please give me this child. And so what's the answer? God sends an answer in the form of a prophet or a judge. Eli is sent to her, and first he doesn't understand what's happening, but he's able to give her the message. So God is able to answer her through this man in her great distress. But I think another interesting situation that has a similar answer where God sends the answer through a prophet is in 1 Kings 17. And this one I think is interesting because God sends to someone who we don't even see if she's asking. In 1 Kings 17, he sends Elijah to go to this widow and says, she's going to feed you. But he goes and asks her, verse 11, he says, as she was going to bring it, he called out to her, bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. And she said, as the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And now I am gathering a couple of sticks that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. She's not even asking for any protection. She's not even asking for an answer or for help. She's just resigned to, we've reached the end. It's over. But we see God, even in that, can send her and does send her a prophet to save and protect her. So God is there sometimes even when we don't know we can ask him. He is still there. I'm going to look at one more example before we turn back to Jesus. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, and this one is a hard one but a helpful one. We see Paul has a pain. He has a thorn given to him. And it says in verse 8 of 2 Corinthians chapter 12, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said no. He said, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. So Paul had this pain, this, God, please help me, please take this away. And God's answer there was no. That's not what you need. That's not what's going to work best in the overall picture of your life. And that's a hard one, to know that sometimes when we really, really want or feel like we need something, that doesn't mean we're going to get it, because God might answer no. He might say, that's not in your best interest. That's not in the kingdom's best interest. And I think in some ways that's what we see Jesus dealt with. You know, Jesus asked before he was crucified, he said, if it can, let this cup pass from me. Please find another way. But again, I think the answer we see from God there is no, this is the way that you're going to have to take. And Jesus goes along with that. But I want to look at some of the challenges, but some of the comfort we see in Jesus. So think about what the disciples would have been feeling. Think about what the women would have been feeling at this period, this time period when Jesus is being arrested, is being tried in just a mockery of a trial. He's being punished, tortured for the amusement of those around. He's being put to death for no fault of his own. And this is who they've banked on. They threw all their chips in this basket, and he's the one who's going to save us. And then it's interesting because in Jesus' death, we see God's power still. There's no question that God is there. Sometimes God makes it abundantly clear that he's there even though he isn't stopping the pain. And let's look in Matthew chapter 27 on this one. look at what happens as Jesus dies. I'm going to read, I'll start in verse 51. So in verse 50 it says, Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And so God did not stop the pain that they felt. God did not prevent this from happening, but God shows he's there. It says, verse 51, behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. And when the centurion and those who were with him, keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what took place, they were filled with awe and said, truly, this was the Son of God. So we see a couple of things here that kind of stand out. One of them, again, God is there. There's no question that God is there. The centurion could tell that this was the Son of God from these these miraculous things going on. These things that were far beyond the human realm or the earthly realm. But some of these things didn't manifest themselves till later. We see with the bodies of the saints which had died and are brought back to life, what that's like, that's crazy. But they don't manifest themselves until Jesus is resurrected. So I guess no spoiler to everyone that this is what's going to happen. But we see God's power even in pain. But I want you to think about what happened next. Think about what happened on that next day. Think about the Sabbath day. The Bible doesn't tell us much about the Sabbath day, that day. In fact, I think the only thing we have in there, the very last verse of Luke chapter 23 says, on the Sabbath, they rested according to the command. So they've seen this pain. And I can only imagine. Think about what pain they're feeling right now. And then what happens on that next day?